you guys have experience in pen and paper, and in pen and paper the game master has a lot of function in terms of storytelling. Do you think that computer games have captured that sort of sense of storytelling and is doing a...
Not a bit. And in fact, I think you've hit on something that I think is actually going to be the future of story in video games, or at least good story in video games. And that's that training as a games master, dungeon master, I found is absolutely invaluable to being able to do interactive writing. And that it kind of puts your brain in a different space where conventional narrative writers can't get to, and it's very difficult to train to without playing with a lot of polyhedron dice.
Though the computer has taken away the dice and sort of does that well.
Yeah, well, sure. Yeah, the computer's great at running systems. I'm very glad to never have to think of what my saving throw numbers are supposed to be. It's getting your head in that space as a dungeon master, as a games master, especially in a well-run game that's about more than how many orcs have you killed, which a lot of people. I have this. If I can digress for a second, I was a kid when D&D had come along, and I started playing it in the early box sets, and I kind of saw Dungeons and Dragons get created. I believe real role playing in Dungeons and Dragons got created not by the people who published it; it got created by the players. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
And Jeff, I think, might know this even better from his Gateways magazine was one of the first and few, I think, that covered the whole spectrum of paper games.
Jeff, do you have...
Actually, yeah, and I'm very close to this aspect of the discussion, so bear with me. When I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, I was a kid in working class Flushing, Queens. Okay, the guys that I had to get to convince to come play with me were dudes who hung out on street corners with leather jackets. This was a tough crowd. Okay, so what I had to do was virtually interview them to figure out how to create a storyline that was going to engage them personally and get them to commit, because I was lonely and I needed to play this game. What happened was that there became this psychological connection with these dudes, these guys, tough guys, and sitting around the table. And I would prey on their personal fantasies and aspirations and weave them into the game. And Lord, they kept coming back. Now, when I went to my first Gen Con and saw people playing the game, I was shocked at how these dungeon masters, these referees, were essentially kind of just showing off. They really didn't care about the people, it seemed, sitting around the table. They wanted to show you the cool treasure or the wild monster, or how cleverly they were going to kill you. And I just couldn't believe it. And because my groups were so intimate and intense and engaged in this game. And after I left the Gateways and the pencil and paper industry and began to search for this visceral experience in computer games, I was disappointed. Short of Dan stuff. It was really something that I would search for on and on and on. And to tell you the truth, what distinguishes what I do from what some fantasy authors do and science fiction authors, your mid-list collection of world builders, where you pick up their book because you're going to see a fully realized world with an ecology and an economy and things like that. That's all very fascinating, but what I was always fascinated with was how this world reflected the journey, the psychology and the journey that the character was on. And this is a kind of Hollywood mentality. The star of the movie, the hero of the movie, has to go through 2 hours of adventuring, and everything else around him had to reflect, if it was good, had to reflect that journey. And so the universes that I create and that Starlight Runner creates are built around the psychological experience of you, the participant. And it's all focused on getting you through this world. And that's made us successful because it distinguishes us from a more standard world development or world design approach.
Steve, how do you think computer games compare to LARPs in terms of what's enjoyable?
Well, I think one of the things, and both Jeff and Daniel kind of touched on it a little bit, is what makes the really best games is when it's collaboratory. It's a collaboration between games masters and the players. And everybody, even when you have competitive elements within the game, there's still this element of all the different parties are cooperating to create this entertainment. And what I find with computer games is that it's very hard to get that feeling of collaboration with the computer. I mean, the game is happening, and you're in it, and you can do stuff, and you can affect it, so it's great in the sense that you can affect the world, and you can do things, and you don't have to sit there and worry about rolling dice and calculating numbers. I mean, heck, when I started doing this, we were playing RuneQuest, and RuneQuest was great because all of us math and science geeks who no one wanted to talk to could get together and play this game, and no one else could understand because of all these numbers. But it's great. So now the computer does that. The computer calculates all the fights. You don't have to worry about any of that. But it's not a collaboration still. It's still, there's a computer and it's running you through this, and your ability to make decisions is within whatever constraint the computer has, and you can't do something really that the designer hasn't thought about. In a LARP, you have more freedom to go into areas that the games masters never expected, and a LARP is a very interesting exercise in keeping the game on track towards within the plot structure that you set up, and designing plot that will keep the players from realizing that they can only go so far off before they've moved into the areas where you haven't written. You can't write everything. You can't possibly be an entire world.
Well, that's when every good dungeon master just fakes it.
Yeah,
Improv.
But I would submit that it's not the computer's fault. The computer, I believe, does not get in the way between people playing a game. I think it's the design that gets in the way. And I think that games are designed primarily because publishers and companies and a lot of game designers think what people want to do is go bash on each other or the mobs in the world. And that's true to an extent. But people also want to interact and have a craving to interact, which is why they create weddings and MMOs and why they create all these outside of the grind activities for themselves. And very few games have really capitalized on this. Kind of experiences like Second Life are trying to build this or trying to figure out ways to let people do this. But it's going to take some really revolutionary game design to get the computer out of the way, get the game systems out of the way of people, and bring back that energy you get at a dice and paper, role-playing game, sitting around the table, because there's an amazing thing that can happen in that setting, in that context, when people's imaginations get actively linked and engaged, which we're just beginning to kind of see it, way off in the distance with MMOs.
I agree. I think that the computer is just a tool, and like any tool, it's how you use it. One of the things that I see a lot of the evolution of games and live games and so on in computer games is that it started with D&D, and then people moved D&D into a live format. So you had people running around in the woods, especially in the early 80s, waving boffer swords and essentially doing a D&D quest, but getting hot and sweaty and stepping on and fighting through thorns while doing it. And they weren't taking advantage of the different medium. I mean, a live game is a different medium than a tabletop game. Similarly, a computer game is a very different medium with some very different constraints and some very different strengths. And the more that games are taking advantage of the strengths of the computer and not trying to shoehorn in something that doesn't fit, the more we're going to get something where the computer becomes a more transparent interface to the game, as opposed to something that interferes with that sense of that energy and collaboration.